Welcome to the Fabric Spotlight, a series of talks with industry leaders, VCs and entrepreneurs on cloud and IoT infrastructure topics. Today we are really happy to have this conversation with Dharmesh Thakker, General Partner at Battery Ventures.
Thank you, Prabakar.
Whom I have known for a very long time. So it's really a pleasure. Welcome, Dharmesh.
No, thank you. Thank you very much for having me here.
Thank you. So before we get rolling with everything, I just wanted to have the audience get to know you a little bit more.
Yeah.
So if you can kind of like give us a little bit of a background, how you got where you are, and those kinds of things.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I'm very much an engineer and entrepreneur by training and by experience. So I'm a double E, computer science, chip design, like every aspiring engineer in the late 90s, came here to work for internet companies and had the fortune to have Prabakar and a few other folks early in my career be influential mentors at a number of companies like Exodus Communications and Keynote Systems and others. And I got the entrepreneurial bug, so was a part of 2 startups back in 2003, 2005. Got lucky, happened to sell those companies and want to do it a third time after business school. But we had a kid at the time, and the next best thing I could do to starting my own company is be there in a supporting role as a VC. And so, as luck would have it, I entered the venture business in 2009 at a small fund called Advanced Technology Ventures, where I continue to do more of the same in terms of helping with entrepreneurial activities, but supporting other founders and CEOs in their pursuit of building great companies. And I've now been doing this for the last 8 to 9 years at ATV and then Intel Capital, and most recently I joined Battery as a general partner to help lead our IT software investments.
It's good. That's really perfect. Thank you very much. So you said IT and software investments. Are there kind of like sub areas that you look
Sure.
to invest, the specific areas that you can?
Yeah.
And I will come to the sub question later, but why don't you cover kind of like?
Yeah. So before I go into the areas I cover, let me just step back 1 second and tell you a little bit more about Battery Ventures.
Please do.
We do not invest in batteries, despite what the name says. Although
These
every
days
week,
of electric cars.
No, that's right. Every week I get some entrepreneur from China and Asia with a new battery formulation. I have to tell them we don't invest in batteries.
Yeah, we also get questions about clothing.
There you go, exactly. You know the pain. But we started on Battery Street in Boston about 35 years ago. We managed roughly $7.5 billion in investments. Relatively small group of investors. There's 6 general partners doing venture growth and 4 doing buyout investments. But as a strategy, we are very deep in certain domains, 95% B2B software. And on the IT software side of things, which is where I focus, it's predominantly an IT buyer, whether it's security software selling to a security buyer, IT operations or application development software selling to a CIO, or data and analytics software selling to a data buyer. So things with good intellectual property and selling to an IT audience. The one thing I will mention which is unique about us is we are domain centric, but we are stage agnostic and geo agnostic. So I spend 99% of my time looking for cloud data cybersecurity investments, but we can go seed fund companies to go pre-IPO rounds. We invest in US, Europe, and Israel. So we try to find the best companies wherever they are at any stage and bring our domain expertise to help those companies post-investment. So we're not hung up on being the first money in a value-based company. We're trying to find the best companies in cloud data cybersecurity at any stage, wherever they are. Because our belief is that these markets are so large that if we can create a $10, $20 billion company like Splunk or VMware or others, it doesn't really matter if you're Series A or Series C. There's enough upside at all stages, as long as we find the best company in the space.
Stage agnostic is fine, but wherever they are parked, if it is not here and if it's not in a location that you already have a battery location, how would that work? How do you manage that?
So, we're fortunate because many of the IT software companies we invest in, the end market is still the US. The largest customer market for many of these companies in data, cloud, security is the US. So regardless of where the companies are, we play an active role bringing their go-to-market operations to the US. So for example, I have 2 companies in Belgium. One of them is the first Belgian unicorn now. We found this company Colibra in the data governance and analytics space. We found a really good technology base, motivated founders, but they were just starting to enter the US market. And our goal was to invest in the company and help them set up a US presence And so we helped them set up a US presence in New York, helped bring a chief revenue officer from one of my other portfolio companies, MongoDB. And now they're 600 people strong with almost 300 people in New York, where we helped them over the last 2.5 years build out that team of 300 people and get to unicorn status.
That's a great story. That's a great story.
So we decouple where the companies originate from where the end markets are, and we try to bridge the gap between the core technology and build presence on the go-to-market front.
So selfishly, right, if you look at the fabric, we start companies from kind of like a clean sheet of paper, and then we grow them to a certain stage, and then hopefully we would want to have Battery invest in them.
Yeah.
So what's kind of like the criteria that you would look for when a company has gone through that arc of starting and then getting certain number of customers? At what stage would you say, okay, this is really interesting to me, and this would be like a cloud infrastructure, security,
Sure.
IoT, that kind of company?
Yeah, I mean, look, Prabakar, we talked about this before. I mean, your model is very complementary to ours, right? Where from a domain perspective, you focus on the same cloud, IoT, security, analytics markets that we like to focus on. But from a stage perspective, I think you're kind of 1 or 2 stages before us. And the key for us, to your question, is assessing product market fit, right? Because often entrepreneurs come to you and they're technologists, but technology is not the same as a product. And so you and your team has the experience and do all the hard work of helping refine the technology, putting the team together, and getting to a minimum viable product, an MVP, that a customer has a desire to buy. And then once you get to a half a dozen to a dozen customers, whether they spend a few $1,000s or not matters less. But if there's repeatability and a range of customers are buying it for the exact same reason, we think you've established some product market fit. It typically ends up being a business that has 1 or 2 million in recurring revenue across 5 to 10 customers for exactly the same reason. That's typically when we tend to invest. Sometimes we find those companies at Series A because on a seed round, they were able to very quickly refine their focus and build an early customer base. Sometimes we find them at Series B. So often, when your companies are ready for Series A and B, at that product market fit stage, that's the right time for Battery to invest and take it from there, from 1 to 100 million, and then from 100 million post IPO and beyond.
Right. That makes sense. So this is what kind of like now start off as Series A, which is now kind of like a substantial amount. What used to be almost like a Series B some time ago. Okay, that makes sense. So one thing is about Battery and your role in it. On Battery Ventures has had tremendous success. As recently, I think last year you guys raised a really large round. I think 800 million or something.
No, it's 1.25 billion.
1.25 billion. So even better. So what goes into that success? Can you kind of like walk through how you kind of vet the investments, how you find these investments, how you work with them?
I mean, look, it's luck and discipline, right? I think those two go hand in hand sometimes, right? So if you're disciplined and work hard enough, you have a few chances to get lucky, and we benefited from that as well. I'd say what is unique about our strategy that has contributed to the success we've had over the last 35 years, we're in our 12th fund now, with almost the same number of the same limited partners and investors we've had over the last 35 years.
That's fantastic.
And what has worked well for us is focusing our investment strategy on product market spaces we understand. So by going deep in certain domains like cloud, data, security, marketing tech, finance tech, we stay focused on understanding the drivers of those markets. We build a network of experts and buyers who can help us with diligence in those markets and help buy from those companies once we invest, right? And we look at a range of companies to figure out what are the best companies. We look at 6,000 companies a year across our investment team of 10 partners to find out the best 12 to 15 companies we can invest in. And often the best companies. It's a lot of meetings. It's like they say, the more data you can use to train your machine learning models, the better the results are. Think of the 6,000 companies as kind of training data for us to refine our models. And they're all concentrated in those two areas of B2B software that I told you. So by looking at a large range of companies across the world and focusing on some sectors, we were able to kind of assess where the risk reward is best and find the best opportunities, not just the best company, but also the best deal structure. And we think that is the beginning of the process. Once we find those companies, there is no such thing as finding a great company and letting it go for the ride. There's a lot of hand-holding that happens once you find the company, staffing up the team, figuring out how to build out the go-to-market model, figuring out open source versus proprietary commercial models, cloud versus on-prem. So it's a long way of saying, by being disciplined on searching across a large range of companies, being focused on some domains, and then rolling up our sleeves past investment is kind of what has been kind of the three keys to our success so far.
Excellent, excellent. That's a great answer. You mentioned something that was going to be, it's a great bridge to what was going to be my very next question.
Yeah.
So, enterprises, if you look at them, they seem to be adopting multiple public clouds. At the same time, they are not necessarily getting rid of their data centers. So it seems to be a hybrid world.
Right.
And you recently also talked about this notion of an open cloud, the interaction between open source and public clouds, and are they complementary? Are they in competition? So a lot of the companies that we are working on seem to have kind of like this hybrid multi-cloud model. A lot of them are leveraging some open source. So can you elaborate on your thought processes on that, like the open cloud concept, hybrid, multi,
Sure.
how all of them, and how should companies be thinking about this?
Yeah. As in startups or customers?
Startups.
Okay. Yeah, look, I don't, there's no one size fits all, right? So I think of the market, if you think about, the $2 trillion or so.
By the way, please feel free to elaborate on how enterprises should be thinking about that
totally.
also.
So I'm going to cover that
The
in
two
a second,
sides
right?
of the coin. Right?
Of the roughly $2 trillion that is spent on IT worldwide, there's kind of like three big buckets, and there's a different answer, I think, for each of these three buckets, right? There's enterprises. If I'm a big bank, if I'm a healthcare company, I'm managing hospitals, I really don't care about IT, but I don't want to disrupt my business, right? So I want to keep my existing applications as they're running on my data center, on my private cloud, if you will. But as more and more kind of modern developers and new technologies enter the mainstream, I want to take advantage of a public cloud. So for most enterprises that are not in the business of selling technology, they're in the business of selling something else, whether it's wealth management services or insurance or oil and gas. Hybrid cloud is often the kind of the best of both worlds, where you don't disrupt the existing applications and businesses that support your growth, but you take advantage of a public cloud and new modern practices of application development. And that explains, why IBM bought Red Hat for $33 billion to maintain modern technology and private cloud on premises while still taking advantage of one public cloud, right? Then there's the second segment of companies, which are, think of them as independent software vendors. These are the SaaS vendors. Think Salesforce, think Coupa, think Box, right? These guys are in the business of selling technology, but they don't want to be locked into a monopoly as a cloud service. So they're much more interested in a multi-cloud approach. It's different than an on-prem versus public cloud. It's multiple public clouds, where if I'm running a SaaS business servicing hundreds of thousands of customers, I don't want to be locked into one vendor who runs my infrastructure.
Or their own reliability or whatever.
Monopolies are not good for customers in general. So that segment of the market, tech-forward software vendors tend to take a multi-cloud approach. And that's where I think Google and Azure, the fact that they've really given Amazon a run for the money. I was at a dinner with some Google executives yesterday. I mean, Amazon, Google, Azure are all doing very well, but Azure and Google have come a long way in the last 2-3 years. And that multi-cloud solution works beautifully for tech-forward SaaS companies. And then there's a third segment of the market, which are startups, technology companies.
Fintech and
Any startup. Like if you are not, if
e-business,
you are
social media.
Exactly. If you want quick time to value, you just want to get up and running, and you're in experimentation mode to figure out, like, how do I survive? How do I create a viable business model? I couldn't care less about which cloud I'm running. I just want some cloud that takes care of it for me, right? It's kind of like, you just want to get from point A to point B. You use any Uber that comes your way. Get the fastest Uber that you can find, as opposed to being very particular about finding an Uber Black or a specific type of car you want, right? So if you're in that mode, you just want quick time to value, you want to survive and just want to get things going, you're more than happy to be on one cloud. And that's what's driven Amazon's growth. I mean, their growth from 0 to 14, 15 billion is predominantly driven by a lot of these startups that just want quick time to value, right? But I think that's the reason why all three of those modes can survive, right? And I don't think one is going to grow at the cost of the other. I think this overall pie is expanding. So one way to look at it is say, hey, there's 120 billion that is spent on HP, Dell, Cisco, IBM, which is all on buying servers. That should all go to a cloud service, which will happen over time. Some will stay on-prem, some will happen. But I think the pie is expanding where infrastructure spend is probably going to grow and the pie is going to be 3, 4, 5 times the size. Because think about all the companies that don't exist today that will be created in the next 5 years. They're going to go be built on the cloud, go from the ground up. So, it's not a displacement revenue stream, but if the software pie expands, cloud pie will expand as part of it, and it's probably going to be 5 to 10 exercise of our IT infrastructure spend today. So awesome. I think it's a great time to be investing in this space.
That's great to know. So what about this notion that an enterprise can say, I have 100 applications, some of them I'm going to keep on-prem, some of them I'm going to take advantage of Microsoft, but some require some advanced analytics, so I'm going to put them on Google, and I need to make sure that the data is available in Exchange.
Right.
Do you see that?
Yeah, it's uncomfortable, but I think it's a best of breed world for sure, where there is, if you remember, Prabakar, when you build companies, and I know you were part of many successful companies several years ago, and the common theme was you sell to a CIO, and the CIO wants one throat to choke, which is why they end up with a lot of solutions from one vendor like Oracle or Dell or what have you, right? Now, if you fast forward to today, the decision makers and influencers are often developers who have a very strong opinion about what they want to use, right? These are the guys who grew up with, Apple and Uber and others, and their tolerance for things that don't deliver value is very, very low, right?
That's interesting. So, that is very interesting.
If I'm a data scientist who got my PhD from MIT to work on a machine learning object, I don't want to go. I want to get the best-in-class product, which might be TensorFlow from Google, and get quick time to value, right? But if I'm a developer that learned CI/CD and agile processes, and I want to use Kubernetes, then I'll probably go to AWS because they have the most history with developer workflows.
Right.
But if I'm a .NET developer at a big bank, I don't want to disrupt my flow. So I think heterogeneity is here to stay, and you're going to have best of breed where people pick the best thing for the job. And remember, you're not locked into any of these things. The beauty of cloud is you consume it and you're done. If you don't like Google tomorrow, you can easily switch to AWS as well.
Well, but people like AWS are very busy creating so many services that if you use those services, you have to be, that application cannot leave AWS, right? So they are building that.
Yes and no. The whole point of things like Kubernetes is to provide that portability, right? I think Google announced a service yesterday called Anthem, which is Anthos, which is all about providing portability.
Yeah,
right?
multi-cloud.
It's like separate the control plane from the data plane, right?
Okay.
If you write an application to Kubernetes, you may not even know where it's running, right? And so we'll see how long it takes to get real, but I feel like multi-cloud and heterogeneity, best of breed is here to stay. It's uncomfortable for folks that build a business selling to a CIO. But I think therein lies the opportunity for startups, because one could argue...
That's good to hear, because that is the thesis for some of our companies. So that's good to hear you.
A lot of our investment practice relies on the fact that there's a bunch of madness out there, and who's going to bring method to the madness, right? So a lot of monitoring, governance,
problems are the opportunity.
Exactly. So on one hand, you have best of breed. On the other hand, you can bring some method to the madness by providing an App Dynamics, which is our portfolio company, to monitor applications no matter whether they run in a VM or container or serverless, right? Or influx data to figure out how do I get IoT data from billions of sensors. So I think heterogeneity and chaos is opportunity for a lot of startups that can seamlessly support all these cloud environments.
So it's very interesting, right? So we have seen that there are several kind of like large enterprises, they are still seem to be very resistant to the cloud, citing security concerns. So, and we also see breaches happening, right? So what do you think about that whole cloud security, cyber security? What's kind of your thesis? What what kind of opportunities exist, do you think?
I mean, I don't know. People cite that as a reason, but I really wonder if that is a real reason. A lot of CIOs are reluctant to go to a cloud because they're worried about lock-in to an Amazon. But the fact that you now have Google, Azure, Amazon, they may not commit to any one of them, but the fact that they have options is why they move forward to the cloud to begin with. And security was kind of like a reason which was easy to get away saying, hey, I don't want to compromise my security posture. But it doesn't seem like that was a real reason. I think people are generally concerned about lock-in. And then the other side of the argument is, who do you think has a better chance of securing your data, Amazon or your internal IT staff? I mean, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, any of the cloud providers, they're managing hundreds and thousands of customers. They learn a lot more about security, vulnerability, and breaches at a much faster pace than you could on your own. And if you remember, the Equifax, I mean, they had the Apache Struts vulnerability. They were sitting on it for 10 months. They didn't even discover it. That wouldn't happen in a cloud provider, right? So do you really think that your internal staff can secure your data a lot better than a cloud provider can, given the technology advances
there is a layering of concerns, right? The cloud provider takes it to a particular level, let us say that VM, and then operating system onto the applications, your own people still have to be responsible for it.
Right.
And then if they are going to go on multiple clouds to avoid lock-in, now they have to somehow harmonize all of those things. So I wonder whether that is an impediment. Say, like JP Morgan is famous for saying, we are not going to go cloud. Right. So I wonder how to break that.
It's a matter of time. I think, look at, it's like in any cycle, when you cross the chasm, there's early adopters and then there's late adopters, right? And so early adopters are the ones that were born in the cloud. They said, ever since I was born, all my data has been here and I haven't had very many breaches, so it must be secure, right? And then the late adopters are the ones that say, hey, there's enough early adopters that have tried it, so it must be safe. And so now I'll give it a shot, right? It's kind of like, why do you use a locker in the bank? You feel that, a lot of your valuables are safe at home, but they're actually much better in the bank who's managing it on behalf of a lot of customers, right? But you don't want to be the first one to try it in a new bank. You want others to try it, and that's the late adopter dilemma.
Okay, good. So in addition to cloud infrastructure, a couple of other areas that we are working on. One is Internet of Things. IODM, I think you are familiar with. You probably looked at them. They are finding good success. I'm happy to note. So where are you kind of like looking at it from an IoT perspective? What's your thesis on that side of things?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think I'm much more interested in the flood of data that IoT creates, more so than the actual instrumentation of IoT, right? So, I mean, IoT is a catch-all phrase, but there's 20, 30 billion sensors and devices that we expect in the next 5 to 7 years. Just in my home, the number of Wi-Fi connected devices has ballooned from like 3 to like 35. It's between, the drop cams and the Nest devices and all my kids' laptops and phones and rings and Roku boxes and connected TVs. So there's a range of devices, right? And there's different use cases around different devices. But think about the data plane that comes out of it, right? Today, a lot of the data that comes from, a few billion devices is transported back to the core cloud. You then create a model out of it and then you push it back to the device, right? But when you have 30 billion devices, it's easier to push the compute to the edge as opposed to pull the data back to the core, right? Think about it. When you have a ring at home, wouldn't you rather have a computer vision algorithm running on the ring device that can detect, hey, this is an actual burglar versus a landscaper who shows up every Monday, right? So there's a lot of opportunity to create this kind of mini edge clouds that run on a regional or a local basis that are processing the data, doing computer vision, analytics on top of that, and pushing the intelligence to the edge. So the data, the AI layer, and the edge cloud layer is a lot more interesting to us. We're less interested in kind of what the communication protocol should be, whether it's Zigbee or like that whole standards battle doesn't really matter that much to us. But I think if we look at the amount of data and the decisions you can act on and the business opportunity it creates, I think IoT is very interesting. So one example is, we have a company called Influx Data in our portfolio. which is an open source platform for time series data. And when I think time series, sensor data, IoT data is very much time series. It shows up at rapid intervals. You want to act on it as it's coming in, right? And so many hedge funds have used Influx to figure out, data coming from solar farms and use that to arbitrage energy trading, energy
That's
trading on the grid.
interesting. Yeah,
right?
okay.
Or
That's
Nest
cool.
or Tesla, some of the other companies might look at it to figure out how to better plan for energy capacity up and down 101 based on how many people are out of energy when they're driving up and down 101. So there's some very interesting use cases. We're probably like in the first or second inning of the IoT wave, but the data plane on IoT and the analytics plane and the edge cloud that facilitates all the decisioning, I think is very exciting.
You
Could be a
kind of
massive
described
opportunity.
IoTM there, so that's good. Thank you.
Great.
So, but but there is you mentioned like the home. So IoTM, for instance, focuses on commercial and industrial IoT.
Right.
So how do you see that, like
In general,
people and homes versus industry?
I don't think it's good or bad. It's just our expertise is in B2B software, as I said. So we end up getting more excited about commercial, industrial, enterprise IoT use cases, as opposed to home automation and
Right.
selling to the consumers. It's a fickle bunch of people. It's very hard to sell to
Route to
consumers.
route to market becomes an
Yeah, yeah.
And also you mentioned another very interesting point, which is the edge,
Yeah.
and IoTM is very much in that space. But what do you think about the general concept of there is a cloud which is centralized versus certain applications and workloads may have an affinity to be closer to the end user?
Right.
5G is coming. Have you formulated any kind of thoughts on the kind of a more general edge deployment and what that might be?
In terms of the time to deployment or a thesis around that?
A thesis around that, yeah.
Yeah,
Time.
I mean, look, 5G is kind of this vaporware concept right now, so who knows? But even with the existing infrastructure, the cell infrastructure, there's some very compelling use cases. So, I mean, I don't know if you drive a Tesla or not, but like I count on that thing every single day to get me from place A to place B. If I'm crossing 101 and the traffic here, I want to know like that split second if I should take the exit to find a shorter way or if I should go farther. So delays are unacceptable, right? And if I'm Tesla, I want to push the intelligence to every individual car rather than send the data back to some core cloud and then 5 seconds later or 3 seconds later even send the response back, right? So for real-time decisioning use cases, where you're acting on the fly, there's already a need.
It could be rich media communication,
right.
Gaming
is another use case, right? So I mean, there's all these. We have a company called Niantic, which is behind Pokemon
Go,
right?
yeah.
And so you want to have this, very involved experience where you merge the real world with the virtual world.
Yes, yeah.
There is no room for latency, so you want to push intelligence to the edge.
Yeah, and some retailers seem to be thinking about that too, from the way of shopping experience and things like that. So
anytime there's value in real-time analytics with a rich set of data, I think there's an IoT use case.
So when do you think is a 5G kind of like adoption?
I don't know. I don't even think we can all uniformly define 5G. So I'm not sure I'm intelligent enough to tell you.
4.9G and 5.1G.
Okay. I've been 4.9 to 4.99 for a while.
Interesting. Okay, so I think we are kind of like come to the regularly scheduled end of the regularly scheduled programming, but kind of like to wrap up.
Yeah.
You have been on both sides of the picture here. You have been an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
You have been in sold companies. You have been in venture, big companies. So what's your kind of like your advice to the audience, who's an entrepreneurial community? What should they focus on? How should they work themselves to be, say, attractive to somebody like Battery?
Yeah.
To build up to that.
Yeah, I mean, look, my general advice for entrepreneurs, and don't worry about the VCs and appealing to them. If you're passionate about the big idea and you do it the right way, enough investors will follow. I don't think you should worry too much about optimizing for appealing to investors. The good ones know how to sort out the big ideas. But I think from an entrepreneur standpoint, the one thing which was a surprise to me, and I would advise folks, is to realize the rate at which these technology cycles are moving, right? And so every few years, you have to unlearn what you knew and relearn the new thing. And I talk to many entrepreneurs who've been very successful in the late 90s, selling, fiber optic company to Cisco and Juniper for billions. And if you get wedded to that way of doing things, back then you had to build complex IP with a bunch of PhDs, hire an expensive sales guy and sell to the CIO of a company and get to a few million before some big company realized that this technology was amazing and bought you for a few billion, right? Think about it today. It is completely different, right? The buyer persona is very much bottoms up as opposed to tops down. The CIO is the chief integration officer. They're looking at what the developers want and trying to say, hey, how do I give the developers what they want so they can be happy, right? Business models are recurring as opposed to perpetual software.
Yep.
You can't sell a software to the customer.
That's a very big,
The success of a product, the burden of success is not on the customer, it's on you as a vendor. Because if you don't make customers successful, they'll go away the next year and won't renew.
Also, if you are selling it on as a service business, you have to kind of rev the functionality
exactly,
quickly.
Right? So you're selling to a different persona, you're selling and reselling every year, if not more often. And the third aspect that I had my train of thought lost.
Rev of
the third aspect is packaging matters a lot. Technology is not the same as a product.
Right.
If you think about it, it is very important to make things simple. And it's very hard to make things simple. If you're an engineer like I am, your head's always running in 5 directions saying, I can do this, 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 and this.
You as many knobs.
And yet, you want to have a simple thing that provides time to value. Think about it. Apple and Amazon created over $2 trillion in value in the last decade by simplifying things. Apple on the iPhone and Amazon with infrastructure. It's a retail company. And they said, you don't need to know about the 25 bells and whistles that exist in your infrastructure. You just want to get,
something to run up and running. That's there.
IT is a means to an end. If you're running a company, you just need infrastructure to do a job. The infrastructure is not the end job by itself, right? So packaging is extremely important. And if you look at a new class of companies that have succeeded, many of the open source companies, it's a packaging model. Open source is not a business model. It's a way to package some software in a way that developers can get quick time to value to try it, and it's a customer acquisition channel. Some of the most successful companies in a portfolio or otherwise, like think about Datadog, or think about New Relic, or think about Atlassian, or PagerDuty, relatively simple products, but packaged very well in a way where you get 5 minutes time to value, right? It's like time to awesome, time to value. So if you're an entrepreneur, realize that you have to unlearn and relearn things every few years. Think about a different persona buying your software, having to sell it over and over again, and packaging in a way which is time to value. And if you focus on that, you can create some great, great companies, because these markets are humongous. Think about Zoom. It's a $15 billion company that got the packaging of video conferencing just right. It works, and it works beautifully, and it works at scale. And if you can keep your eyes on those things, you can build some amazing markets, because these markets are much larger. Because many people sit in the valley and say, well, you're going from the last era to the new era. I think there's a contrarian point of view, which is Silicon Valley is a 50-year phenomena. Many of the largest companies in the world are 200-300 years old. If they modernize themselves, the technology pie could be 5 to 10 times the size of the pie that we are used to. So if technology goes from a $2 trillion budget to 10 trillion, think about how big each of these companies could be.
Something to hope for.
Absolutely.
So thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Coming and sharing
Thank
these
you very
thoughts.
much.
That was fantastic. So thank you for watching, and stay tuned for another edition of Fabric Spotlight.